Chapter 6 Secrets from the Past. It had come that morning, a written message under the seal of the prefect, borne by a centurion. I was summoned to the former royal palace of the Ptolemies in the Burachera, or royal quarter of Alexandria, for that afternoon. I dared not be late. It was sent to me in secret by the prefect himself, Gaius Tyrannus. There could only be one explanation. It must be about Sophia, even though I was certain the prefect himself had no knowledge of her past. I left our apartments at the Museum without disturbing Sophia. The prefect had sent a litter with an armed escort to meet me at the gate. The bearers trotted down the main road, the Canopian Way, that broad avenue bisecting this great city, lined with tall stone colonnades and graceful palm trees. I was born, raised, and lived in Rome. We Romans felt that Rome was the greatest city in the world, and of all time. But living these last 25 years in Alexandria, I had come to understand Rome's limitations. Rome was ancient and unplanned. It had grown in fits and starts over the ages. The streets and the alleyways of the most populous parts of the city, the Suburra, were a warren of narrow, weaving, stinking, garbage-strewn laneways with overcrowded, multi-storied apartment blocks, insulae crowding on the street, blocking out the daylight. Life was lived in the street, where sellers hawked their goods, butchers cut their meats, chamber pots were emptied from windows 6 stories up, drenching many an unwary traveler below. But Alexandria was unlike Rome. It was a planned city laid out on a grid more than 300 years before by Alexander's architect, Dinocrates of Rhodes. The main streets were wide, the public areas spacious, and building was strictly controlled and regulated. These wide avenues were more than ample to bear the teeming crowds that moved up and down the streets, to and fro, from the harbor and the markets at the Emporium. The streets were full of people from all over the known and unknown world. Egyptians, Arabs, Bedouins, Numidians, Greeks, Jews, Ethiopians, and mysterious people from even further east, India, and even China. This great city was the crossroad of the world. Our litter passed by the Emporium, the colorful marketplace next to the harbor. Everything imaginable and known to man was on display in endless stalls. Jewelry, multicolored spices, ivory, animal skins, and textiles in bright and exquisite hues offered for sale to the teeming masses. In the marketplace, we came upon an array of caged animals in carts: elephants, rhinoceros, giraffes, hippopotami, bears, jackals, lions, leopards, and ostriches. They were waiting by the harbor, raising a cacophony of sound. They were waiting to be shipped to the circuses and amphitheaters in Rome and the rest of the empire, on their way to die in the games, to be hunted by the venatores, or to be used hunting criminals condemned to death, all to satisfy the insatiable masses of Rome. At length, we came to the former royal palaces, now the seat of the Roman prefect. I was escorted inside and brought in to see Tyrannus. He was a Roman from the knightly class, appointed by the divine Caesar Augustus to govern Aegyptus, for Aegyptus was the emperor's personal imperial province. As such, I knew that Tyrannus exercised all authority directly from the emperor. I was whisked in to see Tyrannus. He greeted me warmly and inquired after Sophia, who had been my ward for 25 years. You know, Domina, that Lady Sophia is admired greatly here in the city. Yes, Dominus. I am aware of her popularity, especially with her former students. Tyrannus gestures to me to be seated, and then offers me wine. I decline, but ask for water with citrus. There are those in high circles in Rome who seek her counsel and correspond with her, he says, pouring the drink into a chalice, handing it to me as he seats himself facing me. You must come with her and join my wife and I for dinner next week. We must catch up on all the recent events. He looked at me intently. There are matters for which I would seek Sophia's wise counsel. Some recent, unfortunate troubles between this city's sizable Jewish population and the Greeks. Most troublesome. Yes, Dominus, we would be honored. You have heard that there have been disturbances? There are those amongst the Greeks that go out of their way to provoke the Jews, and the Jews retaliate, which leads to another round of trouble there. I confess, there are times that I would rather throw them all out of the city, he said as he took a deep draught of wine from the chalice. I get so tired of their bickering. But Sophia has such a level head, such a sense of calmness and logic. She is able to cut right through to the heart of things without offending either side. She is truly a peacemaker. It is a gift, I nodded in agreement, and many of the Greek and Hebrew leaders studied at her school. It is really wonderful talking to another Roman, Domina. He looked at me carefully. But I didn't just ask you here for some pleasant conversation. He put his cup down and stood and began pacing the room. I have been asked to arrange a special meeting in private. As you will know, Domina, Aegyptus is the jewel of the empire. Aegyptus and its grain supplies and trade routes to the east are vital to the interests of the empire and the emperor. That is why it is under his direct rule and not the Senate. The emperor's control is so complete that no person of senatorial rank may even travel here without the emperor's permission. Tyrannus stopped him mid-stride, turned, and looked at me abruptly. Domina, do you know Paulus Fabius Honorius? I was immediately put on my guard. I tried not to show my surprise at the question. I caught my breath. I did not want to betray the fact that I had an association with Paulus in the past. He must never know that I was left with the infant Sophia in Alexandria, having been brought here by a fast ship. Many things flashed through my mind. Do I lie and say that I do not know him? I decided to take a middle course. Fighting to remain calm and speaking in a level, controlled voice, I replied, Well, yes, I didn't know him well back in Rome. As you know, I was the senior Vestal Virgin, and I had a number of occasions to meet him while performing my duties. What do you think of him? Tyrannus asked, looking at me cautiously. Well, I know that he is a brave and virtuous man, a brilliant general, and an admiral who has long had the ear of the emperor. I know that the emperor has charged him with many important commissions in the past, and he has discharged them with honor, as befits his name. But why ask me this? You must surely know all of this yourself." "Domina," he said, "Paulus is in Alexandria. In fact, he is here in this prefecture, in the very next room. He asked to speak to you privately, and he has traveled here under special permission from the emperor himself." I feigned ignorance. "But why would such a famous person travel all the way from Rome just to see me?" "I've asked myself that very question," said Tyrrhenius as he sat down. "I find this most curious, but of course it's not up to me to question the emperor's wishes. Will you see Paulus now?" I stood up. "Of course, Prefect. I would be honored." Tyrrhenius got up, walked to the double brass doors opening to the basilica hall, and stood aside as a tall gray-haired senator, dressed in full toga regalia with his broad purple stripe, strode into the room. Tyrrhenius bowed deeply, and backing through the doors, closed them behind himself. Once the doors were closed, I lost all composure. With tears welling up in my eyes, I came forward and knelt in front of Honorius, bowing deeply. "Dominus, why have you come? How can I be of service?" Honorius stretched forth his hands and gently grasped me affectionately by the shoulders and raised me up. "My dear lady, I should be kneeling before you. I should be asking you how I can be of service." "It's been so long, Dominus. So much has happened. I have so much to tell you of the infant. She has blossomed into a woman, wise and strong. You will be so proud." "My lady, you have done great service to me personally, to your office, to the Temple of Vesta, and to Rome and the Emperor. You have borne the burden of many secrets these 25 years. I trust that you have told no one." "No one, Dominus. These secrets will go with me to the grave. I took a solemn oath to the goddess." Motioning me to a seat, Paulus refilled my cup, poured one for himself, and sat across from me. He looked deeply into my eyes. "Tell me of her," he said. "Well now, where to start?" I said. "Anywhere," he said. "Well, first, Dominus, thank you for all the funds you have sent through the bankers. They were more than sufficient to sustain Sophia and I in comfort. With those funds and your letters of introduction, I was able to acquaint myself with the prefect, who assisted me with arrangements for a household and a staff, including a nurse for the infant, and accommodations suitable to Sophia's rank. As I was instructed, Dominus, on that stormy passage from the island over Mare Nostrum, whenever an occasion arose that required an explanation, I let it be known that Sophia was an orphan, and that I, at the request of the princeps himself, on my retirement from the College of Vestal Virgins, adopted Sophia and devoted myself to her care, since I could have no children of my own. Thus freed from want because of your generous support, I have devoted the rest of my life for caring for her. Tell me more, my lady." "Sophia was a most precocious child. I took pains to ensure that she was well educated, hiring the best available tutors. She was taught philosophy, rhetoric, logic, mathematics, and the natural sciences. She was a most enthusiastic student, quick to absorb and master her subjects. While other girls of her age were playing with dolls, learning to sew and spin, Sophia was devouring geometry and reading the classics. She had an unstoppable concentration, and of course, being alone in the world, there were no barriers to her pursuing wisdom and knowledge. This was her heart's desire. She has now grown into the full bloom of her womanhood. You will find her pleasing in appearance, tall and slim, with flaxen hair, brilliant ice-blue eyes, alabaster skin, and full ruby lips, set in a perpetual serene smile. She is graceful and queen-like. She turns many a head when entering a room. But Dominus, she is not interested in her own beauty, in young men or marriage or the trivialities of youth. She is a seeker, always looking for the truth, the essence of things. She has no interest in society, but is content with keeping her own company and her own thoughts. Alas, I sighed, it is most unusual for a girl to be educated at the museum, to be accepted into the innermost circle of philosophers and teachers there, or at the Serapeum, or at the Great Library. But by the time Lady Sophia had turned 20, her accomplishments and her serene and confident disposition made her a prime candidate to be admitted. With the help and support of the prefect, who has remained always a good friend and patron, we prevailed upon Didymus Chalcynterus, using every method of persuasion, to have her inducted into the museum. Paulus threw his head back and laughed. Didymus Bronzeguts. Now there's a name from my past. Tell me, is that old Whitebeard still writing books? When I last met him years ago, he had written so many he was unable to recall them. I chuckled and nodded. By one account, he has written more than 3,500 treatises. Now they call him by another nickname, Book Forgetter. But that was Sophia's opportunity. Didymus has written so much that he couldn't keep track of all of it. And he is really disorganized. He decided to take on Sophia as an aide, and she quickly won the old man's heart. She threw herself into the task of organizing and cataloging, copying and distributing his works. Although Didymus was a grammarian, and Sophia's interest tended more towards mathematics and astronomy, he took a great interest in introducing her to the finest minds in the natural sciences, mathematics, and astronomy. He was quite taken with her, but of course, she was oblivious to that. Sophia soon attracted her own students, giving instructions in her sciences. She created and improved an astrolabe and another different mechanism for studying the movements of the sun and the moon and the planets through the zodiac. She taught others how to make them. Her fame as a philosopher and a teacher shone like the morning star. She corresponded with other philosophers in Greece and Rome and further east. She speaks and writes Latin, Greek, and has studied the literature and geography of the East as far as Babylon, Persia, and India. She reads the sacred texts of the Hebrews and the Egyptians. Eventually, the prefect himself sought her advice on domestic and foreign affairs. She has excellent relations with the Jews, who are very numerous in the city. There are more of them here than in all of Jerusalem. From time to time there are disturbances, troubles between the Hebrews and the Greeks. There have been riots and arsons. Just last year, the prefect asked Sophia's advice on how to smooth out matters once more with the Jewish leaders, many of whom have studied in her school at the museum. But tell me, my lady, is there no hope for marriage or children or a home? Is she happy? I bowed my head and thought for a long while. No, I said. Sophia has no interest in love and marriage, although the gods know that she has had many, many proposals, for she is beautiful both inside and out. She is patient and elegant like a queen, and yet gentle and kind, and not at all aware of the effect that she has on people. She moves with grace and calmness, with full mastery of her body, her heart, and her spirit. She has an endless curiosity and a compelling need to know and understand it all. Her students are like her children, and she delights in them. No, Dominus, I do not think that there is room in her very full life for a husband, a master. I looked at Paulus. Forgive me, Dominus, but I think that most men would seek to fetter her spirit. They do not understand that her independence, her personhood, cannot be constrained by the normal rules. To put her in a gilded cage, to stifle her spirit, would destroy her. This is the truth. And yet, Dominus, I do feel that, like Icarius, who flew too close to the sun on waxen wings, there is a danger for her in this world. There are those who would seek to collect such an exquisite creature as a trophy. I thought for a moment and added, but I do think that there is, in her heart of hearts, a terrible loneliness, for she lacks the company of an equal mind to share her gifts with. I looked deeply into Honorius's eyes, with tears welling up in my own. She is an orphan, and an orphan she remains, despite my life's work to be as a mother to her. She grieves the fact that she was brought into this world motherless, and, I paused, letting the point sink in, fatherless. This is a great burden for her, a hole at the center of her heart, which she keeps to herself. Paulus looked away from me and lowered his head. You are aware, madam, that the circumstances of the Lady Sophia's birth are a state secret. To reveal them would threaten the very legitimacy of the emperor and the College of Vesta. I remind you that you swore an oath to take the secret to your grave. He spoke slowly, to emphasize his next point. There are those, madam, who would have taken steps to silence you forever if they had known of your role in all of this. I had no choice but to keep this secret even from her, to protect you both. But there has been a cost for this. And what of Tullia? I said. What news do you have of her? Is she well, I pray? It was Paulus's turn now to become emotional. His eyes teared up and his voice cracked. As he rose and walked to the window, gazing into the distance, he was silent for a long time and then turned back to me. She was the love of my life. She lived her life in seclusion, quiet and peaceful on that island. She never complained. She never uttered one word of resentment toward me. I visited her as much as I could dare. I shared what I knew about Sophia from your secret correspondence. She missed her terribly, as any mother would. It was a monstrous thing to tear her child away as we did, but there was no choice. Over the years, she accepted that and was at peace. She passed away last year with a fever. I buried her there at the villa, where she spent most of her life. I buried part of my heart there as well. Paulus never struck me as an old man. Even seeing him after all these years, he was strong and vigorous, but with these words, he appeared to visibly age before my eyes. While we are speaking frankly, Dominus, what of your role in all of this? After all, it was the choices that you made that set all of this in motion. Your choices brought a child without a mother and a father into this world, a child who forever searches for her meaning and place. Paulus quickly regained his composure and drew himself up to his full height, facing me squarely. Do not presume to lecture me, madam. What I did was for love. It was love that brought this girl into the world. It was love that saved her and her mother from destruction. And look what love has begot. An extraordinary child, a philosopher, a teacher, the very incarnation of Athena Minerva, a beacon of wisdom, as her name bespeaks. That is what love has brought into the world." He softened his voice and said, "But tell me now, is there no one that she is interested in? Is there no one who catches her fancy?" I grew pensive. I slowly nodded my head. "Well, it is interesting that you bring this up, because someone has lately come into her life, but I fear he is far below her station." "Who is that?" Paulus asked. "A strange man. His name is Adam. He calls himself Adamus Julius Aliquis. He is a physician." "That is a strange name. It means Adam everyone." "Yes, Dominus. He is a strange man with a mysterious background. He showed up one day at our apartments at the museum. He had a letter from a tribune from Aswan for the Lady Sophia. This man Adam says to me, 'Excuse my intrusion, Domina. I promised to deliver this letter to the Lady Sophia on behalf of a friend.'" "Well," I said, looking this fellow up and down, "he was presentable enough, a pleasant countenance, well-groomed, well-dressed, and he had a way of speaking that was very engaging. I couldn't quite discern what it was that I found unusual. He explained that he was a physician and that he was looking to set up his medical practice. He had with him a curious boy of about 10 years old, who he introduced as his helper, Abu Bakr. That lad had these 2 little ferrets in his pockets. I took the letter, thanked him for it, and told him that I would see it got to the lady, and I sent him on the way. Well, that letter was from Lucius alias Caelius. I smiled when I saw this, for Lucius had been a student of the lady a few years back. I'm afraid that he had a schoolboy's crush. He was moon-faced over her, hopelessly in love. It was painful to watch. Eventually, the lady had to break it off, none too gently, I'm afraid, and sent him on his way. He was crushed. Well, I opened the letter. In neat and well-written script, this is what it said. To the philosopher Sophia, I hope this letter finds you well, and that you will think of me with fondness on its receipt. You will scarcely understand how much I miss you and long to see you again. When you sent me away, I went as far away from you as honor and duty to my country and legion would allow. I have been posted on the frontier at Aswan and have been here several years. I thought the distance from you would, with time, allow my feelings to cool. I can now look back with the advantage of distance and time and examine my feelings and actions. I am sending this message with an acquaintance, Adam Aliquis, a physician, as he is traveling to Alexandria and would be able to see that this letter is delivered to you. It would be good if you could put a word in for him at the Serapeum, as he is looking to establish a medical practice there. I want to tell you that this self-imposed exile will end, and I would like to see you again when it does. I want to assure you, my lady, that my feelings for you have never diminished, but I understand that you do not return my affections. I would content myself with just seeing you again, with no expectation or expression of love. You were the key that unlocked my soul and taught me to think and to reason. It would be a small mercy if I could but see you again at the museum, giving one of your lectures. That would be enough for me. Your obedient servant, Lucius. The physician returned the next day. Sophia saw him. He told us of his trip up the river and that he was settling into his new quarters. The lady and the physician struck up a conversation. He was most interested in her work and studies. He was very curious and asked about getting access to medical texts at the library. I studied this man carefully. There was a strange sense of otherness about him. He was obviously educated and certainly knowledgeable about medical matters, as a physician ought to be. The lady Sophia questioned him about his anatomy and the treatment of diseases. His responses were, at the same time, both informative and yet baffling. On the one hand, he was able to describe in great detail and authority the structures of the body and their function, but at the same time was unaware of simple treatments such as bleeding and the Hippocratic theory of the four humors. I thought that was really odd. Well, Sophia was very taken by the man. She thought he was interesting and decided to help him. She gave him references that allowed him access to the texts in the great library, on condition that he would come back and see her from time to time and explain what he had learned from them. This led to weekly visits. They often talked late into the night. Adam would explain what he had learned. He had many opinions on what he was reading, and described at length where he believed the texts were in error or required further explanations. He asked so many questions. The lady encouraged him to write a treatise, and so he did. Then, something extraordinary happened that proved to us that Adam was no mere physician. Music by E.D. Records Legends and by Andy Bird, Somewhere Far Away.